Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. So good to be here with you all. It is always a treat to get to host these discussions and have some of our best and brightest members of our climate movement join us. And today I'm delighted to have Julie Tighe, the president of NYLCV, the New York League of Conservation Voters, and also the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. So good to have you, Julie. Eric Walker, Energy Justice Senior Policy Manager from We Act for Environmental Justice. It's an absolute pleasure to get to work with both of you on this new initiative, New Yorkers for Clean Air, and many other important aspects of the work to move climate advocacy forward and clean energy advocacy. We're so grateful for all of your fantastic work. And appreciate all of you for joining today. I know you have a lot of competing priorities, things that are pulling us in all directions right now. These are definitely really tough times for those of us who care about climate, and I know all of you do. That's why you're here. But showing up, being together in community and learning what we can do at the state level to continue to make progress is so important. So thank you so much. And also for especially showing up today, because I think this topic in particular is a very complicated one and a little bit daunting. So it's great that you were brave enough to join and dig in, and hopefully we'll leave here with a little bit better understanding of what's happening with the Clean Air Initiative, formerly known as Cap and Invest. So the Clean Air Initiative can ensure that the CLCPA's environmental justice and greenhouse gas reduction goals are backed by enforceable regulations with mandatory emission limits on New York's top emitting sectors, buildings and transportation. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, why it's so important, and then we're also going to walk you through New York's official public comment tool to weigh in on the recently proposed mandatory greenhouse gas reporting rule, which requires corporate polluters to tell us what they're dumping into our air, which is really important as the EPA has signaled that it will end this requirement at the federal level, along with many other critical rollbacks in climate policy and clean energy. As we know, we're just watching this train wreck happen, and I'm sure that many of you feel as I do, outraged and a bit helpless, but there is a lot that we can still do at the state level. So let's dig into it. Again, thank you so much, Julie and Eric. Please, those of you who are dropping your names and affiliations, if you have one, and where you're zooming in from into the chat, thank you. Also, please throughout put your questions or comments into the chat. We really want to have time at the end for answering your questions and getting into some discussion about this, because it is weedy stuff. And I know I'm going to have a lot of questions and would love to hear what yours are. Next slide. So just want to introduce folks if they haven't heard of this new coalition, New Yorkers for Clean Air. We formed just in the last few months, and we're really excited about this coalition because it is dedicated explicitly to advancing an ambitious and equitable cap and invest program in New York. And we would love to have new members. If you're representing an organization or a community group and interested in joining New Yorkers for Clean Air, please either drop that in the chat or send me a message. I'll put my email in here if you don't have it already. Would really love to hear from you so we can continue to grow this coalition beyond environmental groups, beyond environmental justice groups. We want health groups, we want businesses, we want, pretty much everybody who cares about clean air, making our state better and getting off fossil fuels, creating jobs, and really protecting our state and the climate for future generations. So please let me know if you want to plug in. And there's also, if you visit the website nyforcleanair.com, there's also a place where you can join as an individual, and hopefully we're going to start doing more communication through the coalition when we have important opportunities to participate, like the upcoming hearings and comment period that we're going to be talking about today. Next slide. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to toss it over to Julie to break down what the Clean Air Initiative is and why it's so important.
Great. So thank you so much, Betta, and really delighted to be here today. And thank you all for joining us. So as Betta mentioned in her introduction, this is something that we used to call NYCI, the New York Cap and Invest Program. It's now called the Clean Air Initiative, which really provides better information for the public about what this initiative does. We know this is going to be something that sets a defining and declining cap on statewide greenhouse gas emissions. It's going to require large emitters to purchase permits or allowances for each ton of emissions through a state-run auction. It's going to likely apply to certain sectors, but not all of them. It's going to apply to transportation and buildings and industrial users and the waste sectors. It's likely not to include electricity, which is already covered by the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's likely not to apply to agriculture. It's likely not to apply to aviation, in part because the federal government has supremacy on that. But it will also then raise revenues from auctions, and we're going to invest those revenues in fighting climate, in environmental justice, and in affordability priorities. So there's a lot that's going to be happening with this big project. Go to the next slide, please. The Clean Air Initiative actually is made up of 3 regulations. First one is a reporting rule so that we know what the pollution sources are and how much they're emitting. Second is a rule that would establish the program of the rules with that declining pollution cap and really lay out more of the details about that. Third is a rule that would set out the rules for the auction, because there have to be rules around how you can buy allowances, how you can sell allowances, all of those things. So that has been something that we're looking forward to, is a suite of regulations. It's not just one particular proposal. We can go to the next slide. We expect that there would be at least $20 billion over the first 5 years of the program that would be generated, because it's expected to generate about $3 to $4 billion a year, at least, that would go to New York communities. There was a time, and I'll get to this in a second, but where they sort of divided up how the money should be invested. And at least a third of those dollars, or about 33% of the revenues, again, expected to be about $1 billion a year at the beginning, is invested in consumer affordability, right? We believe that the state was contemplating the idea of using electricity bill discounts or rebates for New Yorkers, prioritizing low and moderate income households on how they would actually get those dollars back. But that's been explicitly identified as a way to make sure that there's not negative impacts for consumers. There's going to be a balance of investments in other projects to have climate mitigation and clean energy and environmental justice, including building decarbonization, which could be something that's large scale, like a thermal energy network, or more funding for heat pumps for individual homes, for example, for improving transit. So there could be funds that are provided to help support electrification of buses, for example. Clean energy development could be used to help support further deployment of solar, geothermal, wind. Workforce investments to make sure that there's a just transition for workers, making sure that there are community-directed grant programs so that the community has an opportunity to help decide how some of these dollars should be invested locally. And of course, like everything under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, at least 35%, with a goal of at least 40% of investments, must be made in disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So just as a reminder, right, this is something like that was anticipated when the law was passed, the climate law was passed in 2019. And DEC included this in the scoping plan that was rolled out in the end of December of 2022. And in January of 2023, the governor actually proposed that framework for how the dollars would be spent that I just walked through on the last slide. So that was adopted as part of the budget in 2023. And we were expecting that by the law, that the rules, full rules establishing a cap and invest program, an economy-wide cap and invest program, would be adopted by the end of the 2023. So as you can see, we're a little behind on that. And we were expecting a rule to come out in January of 2025, but instead we're getting pushed towards a reporting rule, which we'll get into more detail on. Next slide, and I think I'm turning it over to Eric.
Sorry, I had a little trouble coming off mute. Thanks, Julie. So as you all know, in this year's state, or as you may know, in this year's state budget, New York made a pretty big down payment on on the state's clean energy transition through the Sustainable Future Program. And this program isn't a full cap and invest program as we anticipate or expected earlier this year, but it is a big step forward towards a climate investment in a critical moment when we're watching chaos at the federal level. And so it supports a bunch of different kinds of programs and projects to reduce emissions, improve energy systems, and most importantly, I think is really consistent with the scoping plan. So at nearly half of the funding, $450 million, is directed to buildings, our largest source of climate pollution. $200 million are for thermal energy networks, as Julie mentioned a little earlier, which will support clean heating systems at state buildings and campuses, SUNY and CUNY campuses, and some could even go to municipalities as well. $50 million of the fund is going to be set out for Empower Plus, the state's low-income energy efficiency program for single-family homeowners. And the purchase of installation of energy efficiency equipment on multi-unit residential apartment buildings, which folks in New York City, like we act, care about quite a bit. And then on the transportation side, the spending is pretty clear. A bunch of money for chargers and charging infrastructure, that'll go for everything from school buses and other charging infrastructure for private EVs. Then there's $200 million for energy that could support NYPA's powers under the BPRA, or Bill of Public Renewables Act. Some money that could also be used for municipal renewable energy projects and kind of grid infrastructure upgrades. Then there's this fuzzy, yet to be determined $100 million that wasn't directly allocated or specified to any particular program, but that'll be subject to division of budget approval. So that's just essentially like extra love in the couch cushions in case in case the state wants to provide any additional funding to any of the programs set out in the Sustainable Future Program. All in all, this is, it's not exactly cap and invest, and it's not the level of resources that we would expect from cap and invest based on the proposals that we've seen. But it is, it is $1 billion, and that's pretty historic. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned before, like while the Sustainable Future Program is a good start, if there were a cap and invest program fully in place and enabled, the state would see significant health benefits. And I think it's important to really talk about that because of the climate justice mandates or climate equity mandates that are built into the CLCPA. More than I won't bore you with the super walking through the slide here, but I think it's important to note that the preliminary analysis from NYSERDA of the health benefits of cap and invest lay out, thousands and thousands of premature deaths that are avoided, tens of thousands of missed work days that are avoided from exacerbated health conditions, whether those are cardiovascular or upper respiratory. And a really important thing to note is that according to that preliminary analysis, the health benefits of cap and invest disproportionately accrue at greater rates in disadvantaged communities than in other parts of the state. And that's super important to note. We can also provide some information about the preliminary analysis if you aren't aware after the deck, but I think that's really like a high level important thing to note. And from here, I'm going to hand over to you, Betta, to talk about job creation benefits.
Thanks, Eric. As Julie was saying before, in the first 5 years of the program, it's projected that $20 billion would be raised and invested. And clearly, this would continue to drive our economic growth and job creation in the clean energy sector. We are anticipating that would create over 28,000 jobs by 2030, which is really exciting. And, the pace of job growth in the clean energy sector is twice as much as the rest of the economic sector. So it's important to keep that in mind, that we're scaling up clean energy jobs, especially in the building sector, and strong cap and invest program would continue to enable us to do that, especially when we're facing a lot of cuts at the federal level. We would make up for that with this program, and it's great that we have this initial $1 billion investment, but having several more $1 billion a year would be obviously a bigger investment. So it would be very exciting if we can get this off the ground and see more and more great jobs created in the clean energy economy. Next slide. So, one concern that people raise is a cap and invest program gonna, cost people more? But there's been extensive studies to show that the benefits far outweigh the costs. One recent study showed that all households earning below $200,000 a year would actually see net savings under the program, in 2030, when the program would be that much more ambitious. We would see, households overwhelmingly save money and benefit from energy affordability. Julie mentioned a little bit about the electric bill rebates that we believe the administration was planning when they were going to move forward with the program back in January. We also know that there would be tremendous investments in weatherization, energy efficiency, electrification, and that people would really benefit from being able to weatherize their homes, reduce their energy use, and switch to heat pumps. And ideally, we would be installing 1 million efficient and clean heat pumps in New York homes, over 100,000 zero emission trucks on the road by 2035. All of this, of course, would greatly reduce the harms caused by fossil fuel combustion from our transportation sector and from buildings, which Eric mentioned, in the health benefits. So in many ways, the economic benefits and the health benefits go hand in hand. And it's undeniable that this program would have tremendous benefits, across the board for New Yorkers. Next slide. Julie, I believe you're gonna pick this back up.
I am. So we've talked a bit about all of the fundamentals about why we need a cap and invest program and how we got to here. But so in January, again, the governor announced a Sustainable Future Fund in the budget, and that the state would be advancing reporting rules, which was not, less than half a loaf, I would say. But it is at least a step forward. And so in March, DEC released the draft reporting rules and started a comment period. That comment period is going to run until July, and our expectation is that sometime later this year, the rule will be finalized, and help us at least start collecting that information so we know who's reporting how much. But Eric is then going to get into the details about what is in that rule. Next slide.
Thanks, Julie. So there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try and be concise here, and with the kind of high level overview of the rule. So I think it's important to consider the rule like building the scorecard before the game starts, right? This reporting rule, the purpose of the reporting rule requires large and sort of emitters, reporting entities, to measure and report out their emissions. And while it's important to note that there aren't any requirements to reduce their emissions, is simply reporting, right? There's no requirement to buy allowances in the auction rule, as Julie mentioned in the beginning of our presentation. It's simply like data collection. That's the backbone of a future emissions program. So essentially, it's data now, caps in, and auction stuff later. So who has to report? There are two different kind of broad categories of reporters. There's large emitters and everybody else. So I'm going to start with everybody else. Reporting entities are essentially any entity that has 10,000 tons of CO2 equivalent in their emissions, and that threshold kind of includes power plants, refineries, manufacturers, but excludes small businesses from having to report. The larger entities are those that have essentially 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent for their emissions in their facilities, and they are going to have to be set to a slightly higher set of requirements, not only just to report, but then to have that reporting verified by an independent audit every 3 years. And so fuel suppliers, there are 6 categories of essentially like folks who will be in those categories of reporting entities: fuel suppliers, not retailers. So that's natural gas industry, oil and CNG and LNG suppliers. They have to account for every, all the emissions from all their sources, ensuring downstream combustion emissions are captured. Waste haulers, essentially that send trash out of state, they have to tally like all the diesel emissions sent out through traffic and garbage, methane released from landfills, and as waste decomposes everywhere, ensuring those emissions are captured. Electric power facilities or power plants that import energy into New York, they have to report carbon for every megawatt hour they bring onto the grid, putting imported electricity and other sources of generation on a kind of even keel with the other sources of emissions. Agricultural and fertilizer suppliers and anaerobic digestion will essentially be capturing their emissions to a higher, again, on an upstream sort of way. And so we can capture, not creep, large kind of huge emissions from those agricultural sources too. So then what gets reported? Stuff that you burn on site, process combustion, like in industrial facilities, fugitive emissions from pipelines, for example. We have a huge problem with like leaking methane from pipes, and vented emissions from things like RNG facilities, et cetera, et cetera. Then there are upstream out-of-state emissions tied to fuels, again, imported fuels. That includes drilling, mining, transportation that occurred before fuel comes into New York. So we want to capture the whole universe of emissions to get a kind of what they call a cradle to gate sort of carbon bookkeeping. So we capture the biggest picture. With that, I just want to turn to, I hope that gives a clear picture. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. Happy to take a few of those questions in the Q&A here. Again, a lot to cover in a little bit of time, but I want to note that there are some important dates. Most notable is that this first report doesn't even really come online. They're not required to submit these reports until June of 2027. So there's a long time for the look back to do all the aggregating of data and then to do that reporting, which is what some consider a long time from now, considering the urgency of the climate change crisis. More importantly, there is, as Julie noted, an opportunity to provide public comment on all of these facets of the program, all the major facets of the program from that I mentioned above, that runs until July 1st of this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betta to talk more about how we can participate in the comment period that's open right now. Betta?
Great. Thanks, Eric. And we're going to send all of this around to you guys, so you'll have these slides handy. So don't think you need to furiously write all of this down or do screenshots, because we will circulate it. But just want to walk you through it, because sometimes it can be a little daunting going through these public comment official platforms. So there's a few different ways that you can submit a comment. One is going through the public comment form, which will be hyperlinked when you get the slide. But Lorenzo, maybe you can click on it there, so people can see what that looks like. So you'll, click on the link, it'll take you to this page, and you can go through and now it's just me. We lost the page, but in any case, it basically will ask you some basic information, your name, if you have an organization or a community group, your email, where you're representing, and if you want more information, your sector, basic kind of stuff. And then there's a place where you can copy and paste your comment. you know, I recommend writing it in like a separate document and then just copying it in. Or if you want to do something more formal and like a Word document and, you know, turn it into a PDF or what have you and upload it, you certainly can. But also great to just put it right there. We also, I'm just remembering whether, Julie, did you guys also create kind of easy to use platform if people
We
are
did. I'm about to drop it in the chat.
Great. So we have a couple ways to do this. There's that way, which as you can see, like isn't that hard, right? Because the link, we're going to provide the link and you can just put all your info in and then you're in their kind of official system. That it will require a little bit of finessing because you'll have to you know, come up with your own talking points, but we are going to provide you with a bunch of them that you can kind of pick and choose from. But if you want to do it the really easy way, that'll take like 2 seconds, then you can click on the link that Julie put in the chat, which we'll also provide to you in a follow-up email. And then you'll just be submitting, you know, a comment through NYLCV's system, which, you know, is even easier. And Lorenzo, I don't know if you want to show the screenshot, but everybody can kind of click it on their end. You know, you just put in your basic information and then there's a nice blurb about how, you know, the federal government is basically dismantling pollution reporting and everything else good in this country, but we won't get into that. And so we need to, you know, as the state of New York, you know, move forward with this greenhouse gas reporting rule for all of the reasons: toxic pollution, the climate, holding polluters accountable, and helping lower electric bills and investing in all of the good things. So you'll submit that comment and it'll go right into the system. So that's kind of the easy way to do it, or the easiest. So it's really up to you, you know, what you're up for. Of course, you can also just send an email. And again, we're going to provide this to you. So copy and paste that email into your, you know, your own inbox or outbox and send a comment that way. Or you can do it by snail mail, which I highly doubt most people will do in this day and age, but you never know. There's something to be said for, you know, paper. So it's really important that we get as many comments in as possible. We want to show that we support this reporting rule, which we do, but that we also want to continue to beat the drum for an ambitious cap and invest program, and that we really want to see the clean air initiative come into existence as soon as possible. So this is an opportunity to show support for the reporting rule, but then also, you know, this is just one step in the right direction. Really, we need this bigger program. And so we really need as many people as possible to comment. So please tell your friends, tell your family, your, you know, colleagues. Let's get these comments in. And if you can, please consider attending a public hearing. There's going to be several in-person hearings. There's going to be the first one, June 3rd in Syracuse, then in Albany, June 4th, which I should mention is the day before our big mobilization for New York heat. So if you're traveling from somewhere else in the state, you could stay over. I'll buy you a drink, or, you know, a meal that night. Let me know if you're coming. We can make it a twofer. And then June 12th, please, if you're in the city, travel to Long Island City. It, you know, is going to show that you are really committed to this, that you care if you show up in person. And then for people who can't travel, which, you know, it is a commitment, consider joining the virtual hearing, which is also interesting because then you get to hear, you know, their presentations, you get to hear what other people are saying, and you can, well, again, we'll send you the link so you can register for that. Next slide.
Wait, so can we actually go back for 1 second?
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to emphasize. So for those of you who don't know, I worked at DEC for 11 and a half years. And so I do think it's important, like even if
go back one to the page with all of the details about participating in the public.
So 2 things. They do treat all comments the same. So if you come in person, if you participate online, if you submit by email, if you submit a letter, they do treat them for purposes of the evaluation. They treat them all the same. But I think from a political perspective, there is value in making sure that there's a vocal support and call for things in person, because it provides that sort of extra political support, because there's likely that there will be reporters who participate or who listen in. It's possible that there will be opponents who come out and speak. So we want to make sure that we're saying people like, yes, we want these rules, but we also want there to be the full cap and invest program. So I just want to add that sort of like political lens to it. All right. Next slide.
Thanks, Julie. And also I want to mention that, you know, if you do end up going in person to any of the hearings, New York News is organizing some rallies outside of the hearings. So you'll be able to meet up with other, you know, friends in the movement. And I'll put a link in the chat to some of the actions that they're planning. I think they have another one of these kind of prep workshops actually this evening. If you can't get enough and you want to dig in more, I'm sure they'd be happy to have you. And please, you know, let me know if you're planning on going to one of the hearings in person, because I can also help match you up with somebody else who's going to be there. I'll be at the Albany one, but would be great, you know, wherever you are in the state to try to attend. Okay, so talking points to make it easier so you don't have to come up with all of this on your own, because who has the time? We have some Cliff Notes talking points here for you that you can kind of pick and choose what is the most salient for you when it comes to the Clean Air Initiative and this reporting rule. So, you know, of course, feel free to elaborate with your own experiences and, you know, community affiliations and all the things that make you unique and special in this movement. But high level, some of the kind of key talking points that we've zeroed in on. Next slide. So I'm trying to remember which one I'm going over.
That's all right. I think I'm starting.
Okay.
So we've sort of broken this down to sort of a few different themes. There's like 5 different themes that we would encourage you to talk about. One is you have to actually talk about what the reporting rule, right? So we know it's important, like Washington, D.C. right at this moment is pulling back reporting and transparency. So I think it's important to highlight that there is a value in and of itself of the state collecting this information, because previously EPA was collecting and sharing this information publicly. So it's really important that we say thank you for that. That we're encouraged to see that the governor promised this in the State of the State, and she's delivering on that in releasing the reporting rule. Because toxic pollution is being pumped out into the air. We know that this rule is necessary to ultimately be able to hold polluters accountable and implement solutions that will help us all. And in order to hold them accountable and create jobs and clean our air and deliver investments in transportation and needed infrastructure, we need the administration to adopt this rule, but also to advance the next 2 rules required for implementing New York's Cap and Invest program. Because remember, at the beginning, we talked about the fact that the Clean Air Initiative is 3 rules when it's fully rolled out. So we know that there's really important work ahead. We need to keep advancing the Clean Air program to provide meaningful benefits for New Yorkers. Next slide. And we also think it's important that we highlight that cleaning our air and building a safer, healthier, more prosperous New York is something that will happen when we have a cap and invest program. So like more of the comments that we have here are about the cap and invest program than necessarily about the reporting rule, which I think that's important to say, because we know every New Yorker deserves clean air. They deserve to live in a community that doesn't have harmful pollution, that the cap and invest program will create new protections for our air in our communities and help stop air pollution. And that by investing to protect public health, we'll have cleaner air and water, healthier kids, and we'll live longer lives. So this is really something that we want to use as a foundation of like, why are we doing this? Next slide.
So we talked about this a little bit, but we think that this again is a really salient point to mention, which is that at least 30% of cap and invest revenue would be returned to New Yorkers directly in the form of rebates, and most likely in the form of electric bill rebates. Right. And this is again part of this like bigger vision of the transition to clean energy, getting off fossil fuels at the same time that we're electrifying our buildings and transportation sector. So we want to make our electric bills in particular, right, more affordable. as we move to this, future vision, and we stop sending out $40 billion a year to out-of-state fossil fuel producers. So we want to be investing in our local economy, in clean energy, and helping New Yorkers reduce their electric bills. So we think that's a really exciting and great point to mention in our comments. And also, as you're talking about this program with others who might not know about Cap and Invest, they've never heard of the Clean Air Initiative. I should say most people have never heard of the Clean Air Initiative since it doesn't really exist yet, and because it's a new name, really. It was just sort of started to be used in the last few months. So it's important that we all start talking about this more and get people excited about the potential for transforming our state. Next slide.
And so, as Julie mentioned, we want to stress the need for this data because it's foundational, but we also want to stress the need to emphasize accountability, right? So leading or including an accountability frame is super important. It's important to remind the DEC that any further delay in the implementing a fully fledged cap and invest program is really, on the backs of New Yorkers absorbing the true costs of the not having a full cap and invest program, whether it's the health impacts that we talked about before, higher asthma rates and costs associated with care, and just higher pollution in climate impacted neighborhoods. We want to talk about the need to set an ambitious start date and to reject any kind of or restrict the amount of loopholes that might be allowed for reporting entities to get a free pass, and then underline the importance of fairness here, right? Polluters need to pay so that communities can benefit from this clean energy transition, as Betta mentioned around in terms of affordability in particular, right? Helping drive home the need that we need to set this up, the reporting requirements, so that we can determine a firm and declining cap to hold corporations accountable for their emissions is the kind of signal that we need to send in order to make sure that everyone knows that this clean energy transition is set and we're not going back. Next slide, please. And ultimately, we want to pivot with the upshot, right? Where the revenue could go. A cap and invest program could be transformative. Quite frankly, the high end of the estimates are about $12 billion of annual revenue from a cap and invest program that could include upgrades of all kinds, some of which were outlined in the Sustainable Future program, building investments, transportation, energy infrastructure, from soup to nuts, that we really need in order to carry out the full vision of the CLCPA. But we want to point out that, once we start slashing fossil fuel emissions here, we can start sparking economic development, create family-sustaining jobs, and ultimately invest in neighborhoods. So naming specific projects in your community that you might be able to imagine through the resources of this program is also going to be super important, right? Whether it's a rail station, elevator, like some of the work in New York City was done, supported by congestion pricing, or at We Act, we're really excited about place-based investments, focusing on big projects that people will be able to see and feel the difference as these resources hit the ground and in the streets. So kind of to wrap it up, use your imagination, think big, but also make sure that we're emphasizing the need to hold polluters accountable. And Betta, I think we're going to turn it back to you to wrap up.
Yeah, well, people have been putting questions in the chat, and I see Julie's been helping to answer them as we go, but we have some time. So let's dig into it and discuss some of these important points. I see Sarah raised one issue, which I've also heard a lot, which is the billion, in the Sustainable Future Fund. Is that going to be drawn out over the next 5 years? Julie, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I can explain that. So the state is two things. Like one is $1 billion has been appropriated in the state budget for right now. And that's for this particular fiscal year. It's not over multiple years, but in the financial plan, they look at how cash goes out the door, right? And very often with government projects, there's a delay between saying we're spending this money on this project and when the money actually go out the door. And that's partially because of the procurement process that the state has to go through, how much time it actually takes to actually undertake a project because they're not paying for it all at once. So that's where they envision that the money will actually take 5 years to actually be fully spent, but they're not delaying it. They're not holding it back. They're not planning on spending it over multiple years, and we're not treating it as that, right? So it's really more of a sort of an accounting thing for the state on that front. But my understanding in conversations, not just from the way it's written in the law, but from my conversations with the governor's office, is they are committed to committing, which is literally a technical term that's used, all the money within the next year.
Which is great. And $1
Mhm.
billion is not nothing. But when you think about the fact that with an ambitious cap and invest program, we could be raising 4 times that, right, within the first like 5 years, it's, a drop in the bucket. So we got to get this program going. So I see Stephen is asking about, Trump's restrictions and defunding. This is state funding, and state laws, but I do think that, raises something that I would love to hear Julie and Eric's thoughts on, which is I saw recently that Congress voted to revoke California's waiver on clean cars and, their commitment to scale up EVs in their state, and, how potentially that could impact not only New York's, similar types of commitments, but also a cap and invest program. And if there's any, real concern about that and what we should be doing. I know, unfortunately, my congressman, who's a Democrat, sided with the Republicans on that one, which is very disappointing. And so, what can we do to, oppose these types of rollbacks at the federal level and hopefully, continue to make progress here in New York?
So there's two things I would say. One is Congress had afforded California this waiver a long time ago for clean cars and clean trucks, frankly, because their air pollution was so bad. And we've been following that. We and a couple of other states were called the 177 states because that's the section of law it's under, in very nerdy terms. And so that is what Congress has rolled back. And that is very troubling. And California has committed to litigating that. The state of New York and several other states are going to be joining in that effort. But I think it highlights the importance of having state laws and state investments that are more protected than this, right? Because California has been relying on this waiver, which they needed because otherwise EPA sets the standards for cars and trucks on fuel efficiency. There are different ways and different policies, but I actually think it highlights the need for a policy like cap and invest, like the investments made in the Sustainable Future Fund, because the state is using its own resources, its own laws for that, as opposed to relying on a federal law or on California's law in that case. But it is very troubling. We could probably have a whole nother session about what we should do to fight on the transportation front. We'll save that for another day. But I don't know, Eric, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that I think the key to fighting all this retrenchment from the federal government is really demonstrating some leadership at the local level, right? At the state level. And so just one clear example is that, we've got South Fork back online, right? The stop work order is lifted. And that's a clear sign that, again, as I said before, that the progress we're making here in New York is moving ahead, and that there is a commitment to moving forward even further. The question really becomes, how are we going to invest ourselves in amplifying that message to make sure that folks who are decision makers at the state ultimately understand that we are supporting that, and we're very adamant about the need for that transition to continue and accelerate. So I'm going to plug the need to get back to those comments. Drop that link in the chat one more time, and hopefully you can show up at one of the hearings. As Julie noted, like our presence makes a difference.
Thank you. And speaking of, the offshore wind stop work order getting lifted, kudos to Julie and NYLCV, because I know you were really pushing that and championing it. We shared it a bunch in our newsletter to amplify your great work on that. And the governor also deserves credit for continuing to push and fight for that project to continue construction. So good work. Sarah has another great question about, the reporting. If the reporting isn't due until mid 2027, does that mean that the auctions won't start until after that, which means money would begin to flow when 2028? This deserves some elaboration, I think, because the timeline we were originally working with has changed. And Julie, since you're the timeline queen, do you want to sort of talk about where we're at and where we're going?
I'm going to do a little bit of process and then a little bit of like why it's important for us to be saying we need to do this, right? As Eric just emphasized. One is, so this to me indicates that they're planning on getting the reporting rule finished by the end of this year, so that they can have it in place so that people know what they need to do in order to comply next year for tracking their emissions. And there will be some tools available to help companies do that. But they haven't even proposed the rule for the cap and invest program or the auction. And so that's like the next step in the process. We need to get them moving forward on those rules. If they were to propose those rules next week, right? Because it only comes out once a week, right? It would take them, in my estimation, based on how a complex rule like that would take, it would take them about a year, which is the State Administrative Procedure Act requires them to finish within a certain time frame in order for them to adopt the rules for the policies for the program and the auction. So it does feel like it would be a little bit of time. That was one of our reactions as well, like, ugh, 2027. But when you think about the fact that it's 2025, they don't know how they're tracking it yet. There's not, it's not ideal. It's not what we want. We want it to be faster. But I think there's a certain pace to it. So it is possible that it would not start until 2020, an auction might not start until 2028, but we don't know that yet. And I think that's why we need to keep pressing for continuing to move this forward and to highlight what will come from this that will be positive. But certainly it's going to make it hard for us to meet the 2030 goals.
Indeed. From Bruno, what potential legitimate pushback is there on the cost of implementation and the difficulty of implementation? Eric, I don't know if you want to take this one.
I'm sorry, Betta, could you repeat the question?
Sure. It's, what is the potential pushback is there on the cost of implementation and the difficulty of implementation?
I mean, I certainly think that there's a reality to the idea that all these investments are going to cost some money, right? Transitioning your economy is not something that you can do for free. But I think, quite frankly, we have a huge opportunity to make sure that, again, as I talked about in our comment toolkit, like emphasizing the upshots, the benefits of the transition, and then making sure that we're closing or restricting outs for corporate reporting entities and the like to get a pass from having to account for that. Ultimately, the cap and invest program has a sort of what do they say, a cost mitigation mechanism built into it, or that will help also smooth over the transition. And to the link that Bob put in the report that I put in, there are two separate reports that essentially say that if you build the program properly, up to 90% of folks making less than $200,000 in annual income come out pretty much netting zero or making ahead, right? Or coming out ahead of a fully implemented cap and invest system. So I think the reality is that there is cost associated with this, but at the end of the day, most of New Yorkers will come out net zero or making ahead if we do it right.
So on the business side of the ledger, I mean, one is like we're talking about a relatively small number of entities that are going to have to do this. I think they expect there's like in the range of 14 to 1,600 companies that would be subject, or entities, not all companies. Some are municipalities, some may be the state, for example. And so like the beauty of cap and invest is it really provides both the carrot and the stick for the business, right? Because some of the funding that will be used will undoubtedly be used to help with the transition, help, companies to make that transition. And certainly the cap itself will be that stick that says you're providing that reason for them to help make changes in how they do business in order to comply, and to reduce their emissions, because the less emissions they have, the less they have to pay. So I think that's the beauty of this program, and we've seen it work well in California. And at the dollars that we're talking about now, it would be fairly modest at the beginning. It would ramp up over time, but certainly it's out there.
And following up on that, Julie, Bob had a question about, training for businesses, about how to measure and report. I don't know if you know anything about how that process would work, what kind of supports there would be for doing this reporting, if there would be consultants, et cetera.
Well, the state is establishing some tools as part of the rules that would be used to do the actual reporting. So I think it will not be as complex as it feels like, but there's some work on that. We should probably do some follow-up with more details about it, how they would be collecting that information and how to make it easier for businesses.
I can pick it up really quickly, again, with some follow-up if necessary. So there's a clearinghouse essentially where all that information would go. It's based on the federal greenhouse gas reporting tool, but based on sort of housed in New York State. That platform essentially will be the place where you put all of your aggregated data, and their DEC will be providing trainings to all of the reporting about how to collect that data, how to build the plans and submit the plans, and then ultimately how to file and submit that information as we come closer to the reporting deadline. So there's the very like long proposed rule on the DEC website outlines some of the ways in which they'll support businesses coming into compliance with the reporting rule once it's adopted.
Thanks, Eric. So we are running out of time, but as Lorenzo said, we've been trying to get through as many questions as possible. Bob, appreciate you reiterating, time is of the essence, and if tens of thousands of us submit supportive comments, we could accelerate the implementation of this program. So that is really why this is an all hands on deck moment for climate advocates to participate, to submit comments in any of the ways that we went through, and to show up if you can at the hearings. So NYCEV Wackett is concerned about some developments that are occurring in Genesee County, and I think that is separate from what we're talking about today. But I don't know if Julie or Eric, you have any thoughts that you want to comment on those concerns, but I don't think that they directly relate to cap and invest or this reporting rule.
Yeah, I think the state, whoever is the permitting agency would have to evaluate what the impacts would be, as far as that goes.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground today, and we will circulate the recording and the slides and all of the ways to participate. Thank you so much, Eric and Julie, for being here. Thank you, Lorenzo, my right-hand man, and to all of you for joining and sharing your great questions and comments and being a part of this. I know I've learned a lot and hope you have too. And look forward to seeing you maybe in Albany at the hearing, or at the next time we have one of these. So thanks again. Onward and upwards, everybody. We'll get through this.